to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again today. We have another show lined up for y'all today. We have a special guest. He's going to share his story, and he is promoting a new book that you can get on Amazon right now. It's called Black Men, White Industry, My Journey Through the Men's Fashion World. And today we have our guest, Don Martin, on the show. He has a website you can go check out. It's blackmenwhiteindustry.com. First and foremost, Don, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm fine, sir. It's a pleasure to be on your show today.
Appreciate your time, man. So kind of tell us the backstory of the inspiration that caused you to write this story.
Okay, well, actually, between me and you, I never really thought I could write a book, period. But people were always pushing me and said that I should because it's a great story. And, you know, throughout my entire career, I was always concerned about doing business. I really wasn't the type of guy that looked for publicity and fanfare and those type of things. I just never did. But it's funny, in writing this book, it wasn't Black people that pushed me to write the book. It was white people. You know, it's ironic. Because I was able to, you know, I started off very, very young in the 70s. And, you know, basically I started off you can't start any lower than how I started, you know, pushing carts up and down 7th Avenue with big bolts of fabric and as an 18-year-old kid. But, you know, I did rise to owning my own companies and traveling the world and penetrating the textile industry, which is a very complex industry that really, there hadn't been any Blacks before me. That really was able to penetrate that industry like I did and was able to rise to the top of it and own my own companies and all that kind of thing. So I guess that's what the unique thing is about the story is that many people want to know how I was able to do that, particularly back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And quite frankly, one of my biggest areas of success was in the South because a lot of manufacturing of tailored clothing was done in the South. And however, with myself, I don't know, I just never experienced any racism or anything like that. Back in those times, I guess because I always had a very positive outlook and very erect personality, and I was just about doing business. I wasn't about anything else. So that's basically an overview of what the story's all about. Of course, there's many, many more things in the book that can teach a lot of young folks about how it is to, you know, to really penetrate an industry where you are the only one. And quite frankly, in society, because in America, we're only 13 or 14% of the population. So many of us as Black people are in industries where there's 1, 2, 3 of us. And, you know, and my teaching has always been that this is an advantage for us because, you know, when we're in an industry, whereas we're not really, they're really not used to seeing us because there's so few. But we're used to seeing them all the time. And what that does is that gives us a distinct advantage because we know how to operate with them and so on, how to put them in places that they really can, for the most part, they don't really know how to sometimes act around Black people. But it's our responsibility as people of color to teach them. And that was always been my philosophy on that. And so I could put them where I want to put them. I mean, some people were wonderful and some people were difficult. And then, you know, the ones that were difficult was always the easiest to get to because, you know, when people recognize that you're an erect person and that you are in total command of what you're doing, it's always respected. So Shamaya, that was my, you know, this was my way of doing things. And all I can say is that it worked for me.
And with all that said, kind of touch that even more when you talk about building relationships with your white counterparts in a predominantly white industry, that can be challenging. So as you face those challenges, how did you continue to focus on the positive and, like you said earlier, build those positive relationships?
Well, the way I looked at it like this, quite frankly, I was always a very strong person. I really, and especially when I formed my first company, my book details so much about how that happened and so on. And then I formed my second company where I sold my shares and formed Don Martin International, where I owned that company unilaterally. My first company was, I had shareholders and so on. And we were very successful. And so I sold my shares like 13 years later and formed Don Martin International. But I'm saying this to say, I was the type of individual that I believed in constantly being respected. And I'd rather be respected than liked. And I stood up for who I was. And there were times when people found that offensive, and really, I really didn't care, if you're going to buy from me, you got to respect me and respect my company. And I think as a Black man, what we tend to do in certain arenas, because we are the minority in these arenas, that we tend to sometimes take insults and laugh about them. You know what I mean? Someone, it's always been back then, they always want to say these derogatory jokes and all this kind of stuff. And I didn't stand for that. I was very, very upfront. Please don't, no derogatory jokes towards me. I don't care if you want to tell it to your mother, your father, your friends, or your kids. But in my presence, it's going to be straight up and respected, because I'm going to respect you. You have to respect me. And some people took offense to that. And I didn't care. So then, you know what? Then you don't need to be buying from me. But most people understood who I was and understood that I being clowned is something that we can never be fully respected if we allow them to clown us. And I didn't stand for that nonsense. And because of that, people respected me, who I was, respected my company. And I got a reputation. Don's a good businessman. He's what he is. But whatever you do, don't disrespect him in that manner. Because I take those things seriously. I don't take, a lot of times people have jokes. And to me, when someone tells a joke and it's derogatory to my race, I don't look at it as a joke. I really don't. I take it seriously, because I'm not going to tell any white jokes. I had a boss of mine, just before I went into business. I was working for the company a couple of weeks, and they hired me. I was a top seller, and every time we were in the showroom, he'd crack a Black joke. You know what I mean? And I was like, after 2 weeks of that, I came in Monday morning. I went into his office and I shut the door. And he said, "You have to shut the door?" I said, "Yeah, some space on you." I said, "Well, whatever you do." I said, you hired me to do a job. I said, "I'm good. I'm really good." But I said, no Black jokes in the showroom. I said, because what you're doing in that sense is you're not only disrespecting me, you're disrespecting your company, because the clientele have to take me seriously. And they're not going to take me seriously if you're clowning me and I'm laughing. That can't happen. And I said, "Look, he's a Jewish guy." I said, "Look, I would never tell Jewish jokes." So when I said that to him, he looked at me kind of funny. But I told him the truth. So if you don't tell any Black jokes, I won't tell any Jewish jokes. And we'll just all get along just fine. And that's just one instance of how I operated. And him and I ended up being the best of friends. And I worked for him for 3 years, I think. And from there, I went on to form my first company. And we were friends throughout my career. No problem at all.
Once again, talking to our guest, Don Martin. You can get his book on Amazon, Black Man, White Industry, My Journey Through the Men's Fashion World. And being able to have your kind of success in the fashion world, men's fashion specifically, you had clients that love your work. So kind of explain to the audience how you started getting your creativity out there and building those relationships with your buyers.
Well, I would say that, Jemai, I was always an aggressive guy, meaning to the point of I worked extremely hard. And for me, I never looked at the work I had to do, because my focus was always on the end result. And being that I was a good seller, I was always a great person. People always liked me. I'm aggressive, sharp, very articulate, well-dressed, well-presented, and all these things. And for the most part, I believe in outworking you as well. I believe in outworking my competition, okay? And I always believed in my mind that I'm the best. I'm better than you are. Now, that may not be the case all the time. I really don't know, but I didn't really care. In my mind, I'm better than you, okay? And that's the way I felt. And in fact, a lot of times when you had difficult clients and in the fashion industry, you got a lot of pretty difficult dudes, hard to sell, maybe a buyer from JCPenney and Nordstrom. Some of them are very pompous and so on. Those type of guys, I found the easiest. Simple reason is that usually when you got somebody difficult, they recognize, I'm going to say, talent. They recognize someone that rises above the pack. And I always believed that I rose above the pack. So you can encounter all the rest, but then you got to encounter me. And when you encounter me, this comes from my mental capacity that I am the best at what I'm doing. So you're going to recognize that even though you're supposed to be difficult, you and I are going to become the best of friends, and you're going to do millions of dollars worth of business with me. And that was my mindset. And because that was my mindset, it worked effectively. I mean, but you have to understand, doing business back in that era, 70s, 80s, 90s, and early millennium, you were able to interject your personality into your business. Today, everything has changed. Everything's by email and this and that. No one talks anymore. No one picks the phone up anymore, which is something that I find very difficult in today's marketplace, because you cannot, everything is done on the internet. Everything is done this, that, and the other. So you're really not able to interject your personality and your fervor, I would say, on a situation, because of no one talks anymore. But back then, I was able to, for the most part, inflict my personality, my aggression on the marketplace. And I got to be honest with you, a lot of older guys really respected me, because it gets to a point is how to get here. You know what I mean? And forming my first textile corporation with partners we were very successful. We were doing over 40 million in sales and that kind of thing. And then I sold my shares and I formed Don Martin International, which I own independently. And, that was the first time that was ever happened in menswear textiles, that I owned a company by myself, and, and I competed with all my competition. And, but once you're established in who you are, and you're established around the world, and, you have a reputation, whether it's in China, India, all over South America, because we did business all over the globe. Because when you're an importer of textiles and fabrics, you have to always seek the next thing. You've got to be ahead of the marketplace. So where you can bring things into the U.S. marketplace that are going to sell at the best price, at the best quality. So we were always searching the world for the next thing. And that enabled me to do business with many different cultures and people, whether it's in Seoul, Korea, or Istanbul, or whatever it might have been. And I found as a Black man that actually I was very, very revered around the world. People loved me. I never had an issue with racism. I just never did. People respected me as a businessman and looked at me as such. And that was it. That was the end of the story. I didn't have any racism stuff that I dealt with. And to be honest with you, Shemai, I've had, I've given a few speeches lately and so on. And I had to really alter my delivery a little bit, because a lot of people, this one person told me they thought maybe I was some sort of Uncle Tom or something. You know what I mean? That's some token guy like that. And I'm far from a token, far from it. And I didn't realize people would view me that way, and which was kind of interesting, from their perspective. So I have to, I altered my presentations now to understanding that they can understand the struggle that I had and the racism that I did encounter and all the things that I had to go through. And it's all chronicled in my book. But if you haven't read my book, you wouldn't know that. And then there's one attorney, he was after me, and, he had a question and answer just down Spartanburg, South Carolina. He was the head of Jesse Jackson's campaign back when he ran for president, I think back in 1980. And he came after me big time, but then after I asked him, I said, sir, would you mind just read my book? And after you read my book, give me a call. And he was very nice. He read my book, and he wrote a testimonial to me, which was so touching. It's on my website. And I found that he looked at my story a lot deeper than others. He opened up with, he said, you were able to penetrate an industry that was shut off to your race for centuries. And I never looked at it that way, Shemai. I always looked at it and doing business in this current time. He looked at it from a historical perspective when Black people came over. And what we did when we came in, we picked cotton, right? And I thought about that. We picked cotton, and after we picked the cotton, of course, I'm a textile man. I know what happens to it. It gets woven into yarn, and then it gets dyed into color, and then it's woven into fabric, and it's sold to manufacturers to make to make clothing and garments. And people of color never shared in those profits. So looking at it from that perspective, I understood a little bit more about what he said. It was kind of touching to me, actually, what he wrote, because I didn't look at it that deeply. He was a man of almost 80 years old. So he looked at things from a different perspective than I did. But I have that testimony on my website because I was so touched by what he wrote.
Once again,
so I hope I'm giving you some light, sir.
Oh, yeah, you are, man. Once again, talking to Don Martin. Go visit his website, blackmanwhiteindustry.com. You can also get his book available right now on Amazon, Black Man, White Industry, My Journey Through the Men's Fashion World. I want to touch on one thing you hit on, that's your experience with diversity. So, I mean, understanding that you dealt with, challenges along the way, but you also had a mindset of being diverse and being able to connect to different cultures and different people. And with that point, your parents, because earlier you mentioned how they were hard workers. What were some of the things that they helped you to learn early on that helped you navigate through the business world?
In the Virgin Islands, you have to understand down there, I think about, you hear a lot today about reparations. And I look at that and I say to myself, when I never thought about it seriously until I looked at that in my industry per se, where all we did was pick cotton. You know what I mean? I said, man, I'm not from the South. I come from the British Virgin Islands. And the British Virgin Islands, we don't need reparations because all the slaves, when they left, not the slaves, when the slave masters left, all the land was left to the slaves. So we got we have our reparations, if you know what I mean. We were left property, acres of property that went down through generations of people that we own today. Okay, that didn't happen in the South a lot, maybe somewhat, but not to mine. Maybe I'm not knowledgeable enough to know that. But when I hear about reparations, I think sometimes it's good, and sometimes we don't need it. Somebody asked me about reparations. I said, I don't need it. I don't need reparations from anybody. I'm good because we were left we were left the soil that we used to plant and this and do all the kind of things for our slave masters. They took off and went to England, and we were left with all the property. So we're good. And at that time, back in that particular period, that there were no jet travel. Remember that. There was no jet travel. So all the Caribbean was a bunch of rocks in the middle of an ocean. So they took off and left that. Okay, that's not the case today. As we know, that some of the nicest and most beautiful destinations today are in the Caribbean. So we were able to inherit that, and I'm very happy about that. But reparations to me here, when it comes particularly to the textile industry, which is my industry that I know, I think that our people from way back should get some of that. It's my opinion on that.
And when you look at how your parents kind of frame your focus on basically teaching you skills and determination to put yourself in the best light, what's some of the things that they share with you as far as teaching you that you are still using to this day?
Absolutely. Well, my mom and dad were not educated people. I think they both went to the third grade. That was it. And they came to New York, and my father was a custodial worker at Columbia University, and my mother she worked in a nursing home. You know what I mean? Just very, they weren't educated people. They didn't do any fancy jobs. They just were hardworking. So that my father worked 2 jobs, that kind of thing. But they were very, very hardworking, and their philosophy was that they're going to teach us the best they can. And we didn't have a lot, but we lived fine. We had a little house, and in the Bronx, and grew up really nicely and that kind of thing. But I think that the one thing my father did mention to me as a child, and quite frankly, I never knew realize what he was talking about. He said, manners and respect will take you anywhere in the world. He kept saying that as a child coming up. Manners and respect will take you anywhere in the world. And so happens, manners and respect took me all over the world as a businessman, and I never knew that when he was saying that when I was young. But as I became an adult, and I was actually living what he said, which I found that quite interesting. And here's what I'm also going to say about living the life of a New York businessman. And I write this in my book because I want people of color to understand that you can live the life of a New York businessman as well. I had an office in Manhattan, and I'm not saying this to say that I had a big office showroom and flying first class all over the world and living the life of what business people live in New York City. And I'm very happy that I got the opportunity to do that. But in writing my book, I really wrote it to, one thing about me, I'm never a guy that talks about myself a lot. I'm really not. In fact, even to this day, it's hard for me to do that. But I do that because I think that it's good for people to know certain things that they can do the same thing. And that's why I add a lot of that in my book as well. Let them know that they can do the same thing. They could be a New York baller, they can if they work hard and they stay focused and do what they're supposed to do. So I think, Shemaiah, that's where I come from with that, with my teaching from my mom and my dad.
And speaking to the youth, what would you say to a young person who's Black and they have a vision to be their own boss, be their own CEO of their own brand? Based on your personal experience, what's some encouragement that you give to them to help them to keep striving for excellence?
Here's what I'll say to them. I'll say, first of all, do the right thing. First of all, do the right thing. I think a lot of young kids sometimes today get sidetracked and, get sidetracked by wanting to be a tough guy, you know what I mean? And that kind of stuff. And I think what you really need to do is eradicate that. And I think you need to be focused, go to school, do the right thing in that regard. And I think having a good family life gives those kids a better advantage. Sometimes, as we know, people of color, sometimes we have single parent homes, stuff like that. And it's the mother that always has got to do everything and so on. And you know what? And I give them a huge round of applause for the work that they do. I just really do. But I think the kids need to stay focused, go to school, do what you think you're supposed to do the right way. And I think what happens to kids sometimes is they want to do it. They want it to come fast. Okay? They want it to come fast, especially society today. These kids want everything right away. Boom, 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 boom. No one wants to put the work in. I worked hard for years before I ever started making any money. You know what I mean? So if you have to understand that if you have a goal, a lot of that is sacrifice. You got to work hard and keep your eye on the goal. Keep your eye on what you really want. If you got a destination, I'm leaving from New York to California. Okay. And I'm going from New York to California. But I got a lot of stuff in between before I get to California. Okay. That's okay. But you keep your eye on the prize, is arriving in California. Don't worry about the stuff you got to go through to get there. If you keep that aggression and you keep focused, your mind finds the way. And that's how it was with me. So my advice to them, stay focused, whatever you might be, even though you have all the heartaches. A lot of times it's not easy. You get turned down all the time. But getting turned down is okay because you can't really experience success until you've experienced failure. You can't appreciate success without failures in between. So, but the main thing is to keep your focus, even in the eyes of failure. Okay? Because I don't know a lot of people that didn't fail. You have to fail sometime before you succeed. So my advice to them was to do not give up. Do not ever give up. Keep going until you get to California. Keep going until you get to California. You'll get there. Don't stop in Michigan now and say, I'm done. Don't do that. I'm trying to use a very practical way for kids to understand. You keep on going and you get to California, and then I think you're good to go. And then success is something also, I think, once you start to experience a bit of success pushes you. It begins to push you now. You push it, but when you start to get some, it pushes you. And anytime you experience a little bit of success, you want to take a mile now because you figure, I can do this now. But in order to get to that point, you got to take some lumps. You really do, and keep going. But once you hit that Well, once you get that wind at your back, that's when you begin to fly. So that's my answer to that.
Once again, talking to our guest, Don Martin. Go visit his website, blackmanwhiteindustry.com, and get his book on Amazon that is available right now, Black Man White Industry, My Journey Through the Men's Fashion World. My last question for you is, gave a great illustration to the answer to my question earlier moments ago. Last question for you is, with your experience of dealing with failure, of dealing with the no's, the dark chapters in your journey, how did you maintain your focus to keep pushing yourself even when you felt like, it's just worth it?
Well, you know what? I dealt with a lot of adversity. I mean, to penetrate what I did and when I did in the time in which I did, I had a lot of adversity that I dealt with. And, it didn't matter to me, the adversity. I just kept going. I just had a goal in mind and I kept going. I just thought I was better than everybody else. I thought I was really better than my competition. I really did in my mind. It's all your mindset. I'm working for somebody. He's telling me to do something. Why? Because he's my boss? That means he's better than me? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. People have to understand that their talents are also worthy and don't get sidetracked by someone else who you're supposed to be reporting to and think that they're better than you are, because they're not. You have to think that you're better. You have to think that when you hit those roadblocks, and I had a lot of roadblocks, man. In my book of Testament, I went through some wars. But you know what? I was determined that I was going to win. I said, no way, I am going to win this. So it's all sheer determination, okay? Don't turn back. That's what they want you to do. They want you to turn back. That's why those roadblocks are put there. Now, you allow yourself to let those roadblocks knock you off your feet, then that's something that you now will not achieve your goal. So all I can say, okay, keep going. No matter how tough it gets for you, know your goal, because you can get to that goal. And I did. And I went through tremendous adversity. Never stopped. So, and this one guy told me one time, who told me he thought I was Uncle Tom. What a joke that was. It's another guy until he read my book and he apologized to me. And he said, no, I had no idea all the things that you went through. I said, yeah, like that. And I just said to him, he said, how were you able to do that? Same the question you just asked me. Just sheer determination. Sheer determination. And it's in all of us. It's in every single one of us. We just have to find it. Man. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, man. I'll leave it there. That was perfect. Well said. Once again, talking to our guest, Don Martin. You can go visit his website, it's blackmanwhiteindustry.com, and get his book, Black Man White Industry, My Journey Through Men's Fashion World, on Amazon. First and foremost, man, great story. Very inspirational.
Thank you very much. There's one thing I end all my interviews and speeches with. There's this one sentence.
Yeah.
Don't ever let the ignorance of a few affect the kindness of the many.
Once again, well said, man. Been honored talking to our guest today, Don Martin. Make sure you go pick up a copy of his book. It's available anywhere you get a book, but the easiest place to go, Amazon, Black Man White Industry, My Journey Through the Men's Fashion World. And also visit his website, blackmanwhiteindustry.com. Once again, Don, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Shemaiah.